Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, the podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. Today's guest is Matt Forbeck, an award-winning New York Times bestselling author and game designer. He has 27 novels and countless games published to date. His works include the novel Halo: New Blood, Magic the Gathering comics, Shotguns and Sorcery role-playing game, as well as novels in that universe. He's also written a Leverage novel, which is one of the highlights of my TV watching so far to date. He's also the author of the upcoming Rogue One Junior Novelization. Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, Matt.
Thanks for having me, David. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. You have delved into what this podcast touches on is different worlds and different fandoms and the people that just love them, and you have gotten to really dive into some of these fandoms all across the board.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm a fan myself, and that makes it a lot easier. I've been a fan of all sorts of things since I was a kid, and to have the opportunity to play in all these different universes has really been quite a privilege for me.
Absolutely. What were some of the things as a kid growing up that you were into?
I was huge into comic books, and Dungeons and Dragons were my two big passions. Not when I was a young kid, because obviously D&D was just barely starting off in those days. But when I learned how to read on Marvel Comics, actually, and Spidey Comics, which were ones that were developed by both Marvel Comics and the Electric Company at the same time. So I graduated from watching Sesame Street to the Electric Company, which was the next show up. You got to see Spider-Man on the screen, and then read the comic books as well. I learned how to read on those when I was very young. And then when I got to be in my teens, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, which was kind of fortuitous because I grew up in southern Wisconsin, which is about 45 minutes. My hometown is about from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where Dungeons and Dragons was published for the first 20, 30 years of its life.
Right. That's like the hotbed of like gaming right there.
It really was. I mean, it's not so much anymore. A lot of it's moved out to Seattle after Wizards of the Coast purchased TSR back in the late 90s. But there's still a lot of people around here to do it. And I grew up with that around me. So actually, when I was a kid, after soccer practice, I would go up and play test games in the evening with some people from TSR who had started their own company called Pace Setter Games, and got to be friends with them. I got to, a lot of these guys I still know now, decades later. One of them is Troy Denning, who's a New York Times bestselling author, writes Star Wars novels and Halo novels.
Yes.
Now. So, and Steve Sullivan and a whole bunch of other guys. It's just a lot of fun to have known these guys, starting out as like a young teen with them, and then now being an adult doing the same kind of work with them. It's been just an amazing time.
What were some of your favorite games, like role-playing games growing up? In Dungeons and Dragons, did you have a favorite setting or a favorite like class or race that you really like to play over others?
Well, when I first started out, when I was really playing a lot more as opposed to running it, I used to play a cleric all the time, and we used to get killed constantly, right? So we would like wake up an entire party and get it killed, and then start up the next day and play with another party and get it killed. And I think I had a bunch of characters that were named Holy Man, right? The clerics. And I think we were up to like Holy Man 28 at one point. So we just went through them like crazy. Our dungeon master just slaughtered us, but we had a lot of fun doing it. And it was just a great time. I played that. I played all sorts of different games. I ended up playing Dawn Patrol and Fight in the Skies, which was a World War I aerial board game that Mike Card developed. And I ended up playing that at Gen Con, my first Gen Con. I've been to 35 Gen Cons in a row right now. So I started going when I was a kid. And again, it used to be in southern Wisconsin, Gen Con. Now it's in Indianapolis these days. But my father would take me and my friends over to Gen Con and just drop us off in the morning and then pick us up in the evening. Because it was only about a 40-minute, hour-long drive each way. And we're a bunch of 13, 14-year-old kids. And he's like, yeah, we're going to drop them off at this college in the middle of nowhere. It was being held at UW Parkside in those days. And it was literally surrounded by cornfields. There was no way for us to get into trouble out there. And we just played games and had a ball for 4 days in a row.
That must have been an amazing experience just to get to play games for like that amount of time, just being surrounded by like that kind of community.
Oh, it was stunning, actually. I mean, for one, You get the idea that games are an all-day kind of thing that you can play, or an all-weekend kind of thing that you can play. And to see, not just kids playing these things, but grown men and women playing these things, and lots of other people, to realize that this is a hobby that isn't just for children was kind of amazing. Plus, I met some people that first show I went to. I met Troy Denning. I met Will Niebling, who was the director of sales at TSR, became a mentor to me for many years. I met Marty Stever, who then was director of sales at WizKids for many years and many other companies, and worked at Capital City Comics, and I went to college with. I met them all at that first Gen Con, right? So it's just even Doug Niles, who became a good friend of mine and part of my writing circle over here in Wisconsin, who is a great novelist and a game designer as well. Met him at Gen Con. I got his autograph on my player's handbook. I didn't realize it till like 25 years later. I'm having dinner with Doug. I'm like, look what I found. Because I was a geek as a kid, like we all were.
That's awesome. I mean, I got into gaming. I feel like I got into it late. I got into it like end of high school, start of college.
Yeah.
But it like that's the thing that kind of changed my life, and it made my friendships, the friendships that I had, the people that I had like the closest friendships were with gamers.
Yeah.
The gaming group that I like fell into and joined, like we're still friends to this day, 10, 15 years later.
No, I think it's a great thing for making friends. I also think it's a little bit healthier than sitting around and getting drunk when you're a teenager. So it's just it changes your life in a lot of ways. I mean, for me also it was the opportunity, because I was kind of a shy kid, to help break out of my shell, right? To be able to try different things and interact with people in a social environment where you understood the rules, right? You knew what you had to do, and then to be
Hmm.
able to slowly grow out of that and mature out of that, and not out of it, but become a more mature person. We're able to communicate and to be able to do things creatively. I think having that kind of a root and that kind of a base really helped me as a platform to stand on.
Absolutely. One of our friend that set this up, David Brown in Charlotte, when he said, "Oh, would you like to talk to Matt Forbeck?" I was like, "Yeah, that's cool," because one of the things, and the only thing that I had remembered that you had done at the time, just off the top of my head, was a set of novels set in my favorite game world, Eberron.
Oh yeah, those were fun. I love doing those. That was good stuff.
What was it? What was it like to write in that world? Because that world, at the time that it was published, was so different, stylistic or setting wise, from the rest of like the standard Dungeons and Dragons world.
Yeah, it was interesting. Actually, there's a little bit of a backstory there too. The guy who created Eberron was Keith Baker, and
Yes.
Keith was a friend of mine actually before Eberron came out, before it was even uh, picked up. It was picked up as some of a third edition Dungeons and Dragons world search that they had done. They were
Mm-hmm.
paying the winner like $120,000 or something like that. And like a year before that, the guys at Atlas Games, I've been doing some freelancing for, John and Michelle Nephew over there, and they said, "Hey, we know this guy Keith Baker. He's a game designer. He's just starting out. He's done some video game design as well, but he's looking to break into full-time freelancing like you do. Would you be interested in giving him some tips and showing him the ropes?" I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to." And then he goes and does and wins that world search. And I'm like, holy cow, you did a great job there, Keith. And he's got a Kickstarter going on right now for a game called Illimat that he's doing with this band called the Decemberists, which is just fantastic stuff too. I played it at Gen Con. I still see Keith at least once or twice a year. We catch up over dinner, drinks, or games, and have a good time. But when Eberron came out, I just started writing young adult novels. I had started writing something called The Knights of the Silver Dragon for Wizards of the Coast. And they said, "Hey, we have this new world. Would you be interested in writing in it?" And it's Keith's world. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sure." Um, but when they gave me the material to start working with, there was literally only 12 pages written down at that point, right? There was no map, there was no grand story arc or anything like that. It's like, here's 12 pages, and here's a part of the world that we haven't really developed yet. They gave me a really crude map a few weeks later, and said, "Here's part of the world we haven't developed yet. Why don't you set your adventures there? Because that way you're not going to contradict the stuff that the guys writing the role playing game are coming up with." So it was an adventure in trying to figure out how to avoid being stomped on by somebody else creating at the same time as I was.
Wow. I didn't even realize that. I mean, I can understand parts of that, but to not. I figured you'd have access to like here's the everything that's going on and the setting and everything before you even got to start.
No, there was very, very little on the ground at the moment. It was 12, like I said, 12 pages of stuff. And it was good stuff. I mean, it gave you the whole background, told you about the Warforged, told you about what had happened in the past. But it was basically just a brief for a role playing game, the actual final
Wow.
stuff. And by the time I was working on the second or third novel, I had a little bit more to go on. But I'd already established where I was going to go and trying to keep away from, again, from the main action that they were covering in the role playing game because it's very hard to write a novel on something that's being developed at the same time. I've had this experience a few times, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not like shooting at a moving target. It's more like trying to hit an exploding target, right? Because it's going in several directions at once. And trying to make sure that you don't get hit by the shrapnel at the same time is tricky. It's often very rewarding and a lot of fun, but it means that you have to have constant communication with people. Otherwise, you end up writing stuff that can't be used because they've decided to make some other kind of a change and not communicated
Right.
that to you.
Was it your own story, or did they give you direction on what they wanted, or particular characters, or what they wanted to explore in the
No, it was
books?
entirely my own story.
Oh, wow.
They're like, oh yeah, come up with some ideas. I'm like, oh, here's a few ideas. They're like, yeah, go with that one. Oh, okay. And I would try to do like this hard-boiled detective on a road adventure story, essentially, right?
Right.
And that's pretty much what we ran with. And I'm like, okay, I think what I usually do, and it's been many years now, so what I usually do is give people a list of like, here's 10 ideas for something, a paragraph each, and they'll say, well, let's look at these two or three here, and then I'll develop those into a page or two each, and then they'll say, oh, that one there we really like. Why don't you go off on that? And then I'm off to the races. I usually have to then turn in an outline if it's for something licensed, and the outline will say, this is what I want to do with this, and please tell me if I'm stomping on anybody else's toes or if
Hmm.
this is going to fit with everything else you have in the works at the moment. And they say sure, or they tell me, oh, you screwed this up here, but you couldn't possibly have known that. Why don't you do this instead? And then I'm off to the races. I just start writing, and hopefully, by the time I'm done, they haven't changed too many things under my feet.
Right, right. And so getting to like I because I love the Eberron world so much.
Yeah,
I mean, just getting to read novels that are set in that world was so beneficial just as a player, but also just getting to enjoy the world more than just reading out of rule books.
yeah, and Keith's books are very different than mine, right? And they're just different in terms of sensibility and what we're trying to do, just because we're
Hmm.
different individuals trying to do different things. But it's still such a great, expansive world with Keith's vision laid over it that we have lots and lots and lots of different writers who were working on that at the time. And actually, I'm still friends with a number of them to this day. You kind of have this cohort of people that you enter with when you're starting out as a writer in anything, and you still keep in touch, over the years. Marcy Rockwell, who's now Marcy Marriott, I believe. I still see her online constantly, for instance, now. And Jeff Saul and a bunch of the other guys, Eric Scott to be. Um, we still keep in touch, see each other at conventions. It's kind of fun.
One of the things, one of my gaming group had sent over a link to this short story or novella. I'm not sure how you'd call it. And they said, if I know you like Eberron, you really need to check out this book, this work. And it was called Goblin Town Justice.
Yeah.
And when I read it real quick and I wrote back to my friend and I said, this reminds me so much of Eberron. And that's why he had referred it to me. And that is yours. You did that and more work that I had no idea had to actually come out for Shotguns and Sorcery.
Yeah, that's the first story for it, and then there's another short story and three novels, and we have a role playing game in the works at the moment that I licensed out to a small publisher that's hopefully going to have it out sometime early next year. But yeah, that
What?
that was a setting I developed. Actually, that was one of the settings I turned in for the Wizards of the Coast world
Okay.
setting back when Eberron was being developed. I think I turned in like a 2 or 3 page brief for it. And when Wizards didn't pick it up, I ended up selling that to a company called Mongoose Publishing back
Hmm.
in 2001 or 2002. I guess it was in the summer of 2001. I sold it to them. And then my wife got pregnant with quadruplets at that fall, and that kind of just shot everything off my plate. So I ended up not doing anything about that world for about a decade, actually.
Wow.
until I finally managed to get my feet back under me. I was doing lots of other creative work, but it was just I didn't have time for that particular piece. And
Yeah, I'm a father of twins, so I know how it is with
there you
twins,
go.
and I can't imagine quadruplets at all.
It's kind of crazy, but they're the quads are now 14, and my eldest is 17. So it's a different kind of a setting. It's
Right.
young. There's a lot more. It's a lot more work when they're young. It's a different kind of work when they're older, but it's they're more autonomous now.
Right.
And how old are your guys?
I have a 8-year-old, and then my twins are turning 7 this month.
Oh, fantastic! That's a fun age. You must have had a great time at Halloween.
Yeah, we did. It's all Pokemon themed. So we had 2 Pikachu's, an Ash, and then my wife and I dressed as Team Rocket.
As long as nobody tried to capture the kids and carry them off, you're good.
No, we're good.
Okay,
We are good.
excellent.
So, how did you come up with Shotguns and Sorcery? Because I like at first when I was thinking, oh, you were influenced by Eberron, but to now know that it was something that you were working on before Eberron was even published, was it just something that you had maybe played with as like a gamer, or just something that as you were reading or developing things, it's something that you saw that you wanted to actually have out there?
It was something I'd wanted to do for a long time. And I think that's one of the reasons I ended up writing the Eberron novels. Is Keith and I have similar sensibilities in that respect. Uh, and also, obviously, since I took like a decade to get it to market and probably a decade after I'd written Eberron novels, even, well, 8 years at least. Obviously, working on the Eberron stuff influenced me by that point. But when I first came up with it, it was mostly because two of my favorite authors and two of my favorite genres are hardboiled detective and fantasy, right? And my favorite
Mm-hmm.
authors are Raymond Chandler and J.R. Tolkien. So I wanted to come up with a way that kind of mashed those together. So you had the hardboiled detective fiction set in this fantasy universe that had graduated a bit beyond the Tolkien-esque setting or the D&D setting, where everybody's just out there adventuring in the wilderness, going off and fighting dragons, and see if I could come up with something that was a little more like a 1920s or 1930s version of that, essentially, if things had moved on a little bit society-wise. And that's what I ended up coming up with. So you have this hard-boiled detective fiction set in Dragon City, which is ruled over by the Dragon Emperor, who has cut a deal with all the people in the city that he gets to rule over them as long as he protects them from the hordes of undead that are roaming outside the city walls. And so it's got that dark sensibility to it, that kind of a post-war feel, and that hard-boiled detective going down these dirty streets going on, but still has the man has an ensorcelled shotgun and a wand that he pulls out when he needs to, and he's friends with dwarves and elves and all sorts of other stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
that was just something, that kind of imagery just really spoke to me. I really enjoyed that. Enough that a bunch of
And
writing out of it.
and now it's being turned into finally a role-playing game at
Yeah,
this point.
exactly. And it's funny because I had originally done it as a role playing game setting for D20 way back in the day.
Right.
And then I ended up, after the books came out, I had a guy who wanted to do enhanced ebook editions of them. So they're going to have like narration and maps and animation and illustrations and all sorts of wacky, great stuff. And this is by a company who did something called Steampunk Homes that they made a lot of money on Kickstarter. But then they tried to do a second Kickstarter for another project and it failed badly. The company folded before they could get to my project. But the artist they had hooked me up with said, "Man, Matt, I really want to do this kind of stuff. What else can we do?" And after hemming and hawing about it for a long time, I said, "Well, I'd really like to do a role playing game." And he was about that too. I thought I would publish it because I had done that before. I used to run a company called Pinnacle Entertainment Group, which
Right.
did Deadlands and Brave New World and a bunch of other games.
Which Deadlands is one of my favorite role-playing games that I'd never get to role-play
Yeah,
at.
it's a lot of fun. Shane Hensley created that one. I was the president of the company at the time and the editor, but um, and I love that game. It's still to this day a lot of fun. But Jeremy Muller here had said, I'd like to do this, but I'm like, I'd like to do it, but I realized again I was never going to have the time to get around to producing a role playing game and selling it properly. So Jeremy insisted that I give him the license, and I eventually worked out a deal. And then he ran a Kickstarter a while back to raise some money for it. So right now the game has been written. Actually, I wrote the background for it, and we had a guy named Rob Schwalb, who's a good buddy of mine, do the rules for it. Rob is a guy who worked on fourth edition and fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, even did a bunch of third edition stuff, but was one of the main creative forces for those games. and has his own game called The Shadow of the Demon Lord that's come out over the past year and a half or so. Just a fantastic designer, a great guy. And so he did the rules for that. The game's all done except for the artwork because Jeremy's the artist. And he's trying to run a company and do the artwork at the same time. And unfortunately, has had a pretty shocking divorce he's had to go through over the last year and a half. But now that the dust has settled on that, he's getting back to doing the drawings, and we should have the game out sometime early next year, I would hope.
Oh, awesome. And does it play like a typical, like, just standard Dungeons and Dragons game with, the D20 as the main die, or is it something different with like D10s?
It actually uses a rule set from a game called Numenera,
Oh,
which
okay.
was not Monty Cook's game, right? So Monty has the cipher system that he uses for Numenera and the Strange
Yep.
and all the other games that they work on nowadays over at Monty Cook Games. And Monty and I go way back too. In fact, Monty was one of the editors on the first major role-playing game book I wrote back in '92 or something like that. Came out in '92 called Western Hero. He
Okay.
took over from Rob Bell, who's now in the Virginia State Legislature at some point, and was running for state attorney, I think, at one point. But Rob got into politics out of doing games, actually, believe it or not. And the guy who took over for Rob as the editor on this book was Monty Cook, who'd been doing it for a couple of years, and he and I became friends. And then he ended up going over to Wizards of the Coast and being one of the main developers on third edition Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
And when Monty came out with Numenera, I'm like, oh, this is a great rule system. Looks like lots of fun. And when Jeremy was looking for a rule set to use, he struck upon Numenera and said, this would work perfectly for this. So one of the reasons we hired Rob in to do the rules was because Rob was one of the few freelancers at the time who had extensive experience doing Numenera.
Okay.
So we're like, Rob, you're the right guy. And he had so many other skills. He's such a great writer anyway, but also had the perfect experience for that rule set. And we knew that he would do a fantastic job with it. And he really did.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm really I enjoy that rule system that they've developed over there with the games. I don't play I don't have a game now of anything, which is sad and disappointing on many levels.
I know how you feel.
But just getting to read those books though, I get enjoyment out of like the settings and the world that they've built.
No, I know how you feel about not having enough time to game. I don't have a regular role playing game session myself these days. It's just I'm too busy and I'm with the kids and everything else. But the other trick is that when you do this stuff creatively, you don't have as much time to do it for fun as you used to, right? I had a
Right.
friend of mine, Ray Greer, used to be one of the Hero Games guys, and Ray said, once your hobby becomes your business um, or your profession, you need to find another hobby, right? It's not just for fun anymore. It does suck some of the fun out of it. It's fun in a different way, but it's not the same, right? I used to edit novels too, and before I started writing novels, and after you've done editing for a long time, it's very hard to read just for pleasure, right? And it
Right.
took me a long time
Absolutely.
to get away from that after I quit editing and moved on to full-time creation, to be able to just break that habit of having to read every sentence, every word, every letter, and slow yourself down, which is what you have to do as an editor. But as a reader, you just want to breeze right through it all, just suck it up into your brain as quickly as possible for the fun of it.
Absolutely.
And it takes a while to educate yourself out of that or re-educate yourself out of it.
What's it like to play in other people's settings? Like, for instance, one of the books that you wrote was based in the Leverage universe,
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
which on this podcast, one of my first guests and I, we love the Leverage universe. It's one of our favorite TV shows. It's sad that it is done at this point, but what they provided was 5 seasons of excellent TV show and characters.
Yeah,
What was it like to get to be in that universe?
it was a great time, honestly. 5 seasons. I'm sad this show is gone too, but 5 seasons is a good run for any show. So
Oh
I think
yeah.
we got as much as we could out of it at the time, and who the hell knows what might happen. Now we have Twin Peaks coming back 25 years later, right? So, um, but I had actually met the showrunner John Rogers a few years before that, I think at Comic Con, and I had been a fan of his blog and of some of his comic book writing, and John had been a big gamer for many years. So we kind of hit it off, started chatting, And when Leverage came out, I was a huge fan of it. And I said, John, if you ever need anybody to write novels for that, let me know, right? And he said, well, do you know any editors at publishers that might be interested? I said, oh, yeah, I know a number of those. So I set him up with, I think, 3 out of the different, they were big 6 at the time, publishing houses. I set him up with editors of those and got in contact with Rachel Olshan, who was his production manager at the time. And they went off, and then like 3 years later, they show up with a novel contract saying, hey, we've got novels here. Would you be interested in writing one of these? Yes, I would. And I didn't have time to do it at the time. I was busy with a lot of other projects. I'm like, but this is one I've been waiting on. I've been watching the shows, and I just love this stuff. It'd be a chance to work in John's world. I said, yeah, I'll do it. So as long as I get to write the first one, I got to write the first Leverage novel, The Big Con, and I had an absolute ball with it. I just had a ton of fun. And I actually said it at Comic-Con, which was, again, where I had met John many years before that. So he's a big geek, and he's a big role-playing gamer, and loves all this. And he was a comic book writer as well. So I knew he would love that kind of stuff, just having it at Comic-Con. I ended up including a mutual friend of ours, Will Wheaton, who was also in the book. And Will was also a character on the TV show, a guy named Chaos, who was a hacker. And I just had a ball playing with that. And there's a lot of little inside jokes and geek references and things like that. But it was a chance for me to just cut loose and go wild with this kind of geekdom that a lot of us are involved in, right? And secretly, a lot of TV people are involved with as well. It's just kind of funny.
Who is your favorite character to write in that Leverage universe?
That's tricky. I think all of them were kind of fun, but I think that one particularly, because it was set at Comic-Con, Hardison was clearly the geekiest of the entire group, right? And Hardison's always kind of fun because he's this cool geek. He's like, yeah, I'm cool. I do all this stuff. But I'm at my heart, I'm a nerd and a geek and a computer game guy, and I love comic books and all this other stuff. He's the guy who talks about, when the new World of Warcraft expansion comes out, everything else stops for him, right?
Right.
And to be able to take that, put him in a setting where he would be the person who knew it best of all out of anybody there, of that entire crew, and having him to have to be the guide for that crew going through as well, in a sense. That was a lot of fun. So I had a ball writing with him. But all the characters just are interesting and intriguing and entertaining. And I got to spotlight each of them in their own chapters and have a lot of fun with them. And it was neat to just think about the Leverage crew dancing around Comic-Con and busting the balls of some evil jackass who was ripping off comic book artists at the same time.
Right. And now you've also done books that are based on video games like Halo and Guild Wars.
Yeah.
How does that work? Is it where the publisher of the video game decides that they want to branch out into novels and they look for writers, or like what's the process there?
It differs from group to group, but generally what happens is you have an existing role-playing game that you want to do novels for, or existing computer game. And if it's an established one there that it's already got a big audience, then you can often find a big publisher who would be interested in helping you out with that, right? If it's a brand new one, a lot of times the publisher is going to say, well, we got a lot of books and a lot of opportunities. Let's see if we can do something with you once you've had an audience, right? And so you see, like nowadays, they have Assassin's Creed novels and all sorts of stuff. But before Assassin's Creed came out, there were no novels because the publishers, like everybody else who does licensing, wants to go with something that's already established that has a pre-existing audience. So the computer game developer looks and says, we'd like to do novels of this. Once they have an audience, they can get a publisher to listen to them. They license that stuff to the publisher, and then depending on who they are, they either line up the writers themselves or they ask the publisher to find writers for them, right?
Okay.
And at the end of the day, everybody has to agree on who the writers have to be. They have to be somebody that the publishers and the developers are comfortable with. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because the publishers, the people, this is their business. They know what they're doing. But the developers are the license holders. Those are the people who own the property, and they have approval rights over everything. So if they don't like something, then it ends right there, right? So with the Guild Wars one, I was actually approached by the guys who do at the Guild Wars studio. They're developed by NCSoft, their division of NCSoft, and they approached me directly. Actually, I think they approached 6 different writers, and they had each of us write a brief or a pitch for them based upon the world for what we would do to bridge the gap between Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2, which was coming out in a year or so after the novels, theoretically. And so they got 6 of us to write these. They accepted 3 of them, and then had us turn those into novels. And mine was kind of interesting because I came up with a way to bridge this 250-year gap between the 2 video games, and still telling an interesting adventure story at the same time. And I did it by I cheated. I copied off one of the oldest novels in English language, the Canterbury Tales, by Geoffrey Chaucer, this Middle English novel. And it's a story in which you have a set of pilgrims going from one place to another, and along the way, they tell stories about themselves and why they're on this journey, right? Dan Simmons did the same thing when he did the novel Hyperion in a science fiction setting. I thought, I can do that for this fantasy setting, and I can have these different characters tell a story about why they're going on this quest, and then have it wrap up with a rousing adventure story, or have interstitial bits that show you how they're working together and learning how to work together until they get to the big bad at the end. And they thought that was a great idea, so they signed me on to write that book. I ended up co-writing it with Jeff Grubb, who was a friend of mine from the TSR days, and Jeff was now the head lore writer for Guild Wars. And originally I was going to write it myself, but what happened is, you remember me talking before about how these things can be an exploding target. The Guild Wars 2 setting actually was still in development, and as I was writing the book, things were changing. They were moving cities around, right? So it was hard for me to nail things down as to where they actually were. And eventually they said, well, Jeff is actually the guy writing this stuff at the time, and will have a better grasp than anybody else. So would it be okay if he could co-author this book with you? And of course, Jeff's a great guy. I love him. He's also a fantastic writer, and has written a number of substantial and amazing novels on his own. So when that happened, I'm like, yeah, sure, that'd be fantastic. So that novel I ended up co-authoring with him, but he carried it across the finish line, so to speak. And then I did a final draft that actually just kind of polished it so it was more blending our tones together at the end of the day. With the other novels, with the Halo novel, for instance, that was one where I had written a Guild Wars novel actually for an editor named Ed Schlesinger over at Pocket Books, or Simon & Schuster, which is the umbrella under which Pocket Books sits. And I saw online that he had gotten Tor, which is a division of whichever company they were part of, I forget, Macmillan. They actually had the license for the Halo novels for many years, and then they lost it because the editor who had been with the company had left. The guy who had been in charge of the Halo novels had left, and kind of retired at that point, or gotten out of publishing. And the license was up for grabs, and the guys over at Simon & Schuster grabbed it, and Ed was going to be the guy who was overseeing that novel line. So I wrote Ed a note saying, Ed, come up, this is perfect. I'd love to do this because I'm a huge Halo fan from way back. And he said, damn it, man, I was just writing you a note right now, actually. So, because I thought you'd be perfect for this job. And I'm like, yes, I would be. So let's go. So I ended up writing this Halo novella from him. It's about 55, 60,000 words. So it's actually a short novel. And we had a great time working on that, and hopefully doing some more stuff in the future. I did a short story based on some of the characters I used in that came out in Halo Fractures last month too, which was an anthology of different short stories set in the Halo universe. But again, it's funny how this all welds together. I'd actually, back before Halo came out, I had interviewed with the guys at Halo about doing some game development writing for them for, I think, the Myth universe, which was another video game they'd done way back in the day. And while I was down there, a guy named Bob Settles, who's I think now working for Paizo for their computer game division, he had shown me around their offices in Chicago, which is where they were before they got purchased by Microsoft. He said, here, let me show you this. And he showed me Halo like a year and a half or 2 years before it actually came out. And so I got to see the Master Chief and the universe they were running around in. And it was only like a 5-minute, 10-minute preview, but still, it was like just, gobsmacked by how amazing it was and all the attention to detail they put into it. And then, years and years later, here I am writing Halo novels, which was just a kick in the pants and a lot of fun.
That's awesome. They're just like between getting to see a game that's not even out yet and then getting to write in that universe, or getting to be the 13 or 14-year-old at Gen Con now writing games or game novels for those same worlds or same settings is incredible.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. And I'm still a fan. Like, for instance, Loot Crate is doing Halo stuff nowadays, right? And they actually did an interview with me in their first Halo, in the first crate that came out. They had a little newsletter of or magazine, whatever that came out, and they had an interview with me in there and an excerpt from my short story that came out in Halo Fractures. And I'm like, they might give me a copy of this, but screw it, I'm buying it. So I actually subscribed to Halo Loot Crate. And I just got the last one, or the second one just came in today, or yesterday afternoon actually on Halloween. And it's got the toy in it is actually Buck, Eddie Buck, who's played by Nathan Fillion, who was the main character in the novel that I wrote too. And I'm like, oh, this is great.
Awesome.
So now I got a Buck figure on my desk. So I'm like, cool. I'm just as geeked about that as any fan. I love having this kind of stuff out here. It's just, it's fun to kick around with. It's fun to run into these people. It's fun to be able to play in different universes. And once you've been doing it for years and years, you tend to see the same people over and over and work with them over and over. It's kind of a kick.
Now, another of the big universes that you've gotten to be a part of is the Marvel Universe.
Yeah, kind of in an oblique way, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you do it looks like the encyclopedias?
Yeah, I did the encyclopedia. I did the Marvel Encyclopedia in 2009, 2014. And I did the Avengers Encyclopedia in 2015. Then I had a Captain America book that covered 75 years of his history that came out this year, actually, came out back in the spring.
What's it like being a part of the Marvel Universe as far as like with the encyclopedias, you're going over like individual characters,
yeah, exactly.
Right? How is that? Like, I mean, especially with the Avengers who have so many members, just having to be involved with each one of them.
It's a trick. No, with the Avengers, at least I had two other authors I was working with, Matt Wallace and Daniel Wallace and Matt Manning. And with the Marvel Encyclopedia, I was doing the second and third version. So they had a team of guys who had written the first version, actually.
Okay.
Came out back in 2004, 2006, whatever it was. So I'm standing on the shoulders of other people when I'm working on these things. But the first thing we do when we set these things up or when we start working on one of these books is we outline the entire thing page by page, right? And we figure out who we're going to be talking about. So your first bit is like, okay, we're going to do another revision of the Marvel Encyclopedia. Who's had any major changes we need to deal with? And it turns out just about every character in the entire book. And then who needs to be added to this that's been developed since then? And are there any events that we need to speak about that are earth-shattering or universe-shattering? And of course there have been because it's Marvel.
Right, every year at least.
It seems like it, right? And then you sit down. Okay, we cover all this stuff. We know where the pages are. That gives us about the length of which we need to cover each of these topics. We know the depth that we need to go into. And then I'm off to the races to start writing them. And I actually enjoy writing these things. It's very different than writing novels. So novels, you're struggling, you're writing you're juggling so many different things in your head at once. Different characters and plot arcs and story arcs and character arcs and settings and all sorts of other things that go into these. Yeah, but with one of these encyclopedias, you're basically reading and regurgitating, right? It's like writing a report for school when you were a kid. So you go back, like, oh, I have to read all the Spider-Man comics over the last 5 years. Shucks. It's such a terrible thing. Don't throw me in the briar patch, right? It's tons of fun. It's a great excuse to read lots and lots and lots of comics. And then, try to boil those down into a couple of pages, right? And it's just an amazing time to be able to do this and quite an honor. But for me, it's a great excuse to go read all these comics because honestly, during the times I have between these books, I will stop reading comics for like a year, right? Because I'm just overfed at a certain point. I'm like, oh, I just don't think I can read any comic books for a while. But then, like a year later, I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds intriguing. My kids have been reading this, and they're drawing me back in, so I got to read more of that. And by the time I have another book roll around, I'm already have my head full of this stuff, right?
Right.
But then I have to go back and read it again anyway, because the trick is you have to get the stuff exactly right? Because no matter how good my memory may be about what I thought I read about, Wolverine and team up with Spider-Man and the Avengers 6 years ago, I have to get it exactly right. It has to be something where a fan can go and look and say, this is where this came from, right? This is because the fans out there. Doesn't matter how well I know all of this stuff. There's going to be some fan out there that knows particulars better than I do, and I have to at least try to approach that, if not excel past that.
And then you did Captain America, who has been, for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, one of their standout characters.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you start off with Iron Man, but like that Captain America, that series of movies has really been one of their strongest of like the big three that they've done between like Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America.
Yeah, they're definitely my favorite set of movies. And honestly, when I started the Captain America book, Spider-Man was my favorite Marvel character. Right? I grew up with Spidey. I learned to read on Spidey comics, like I said. And
Right.
but by the time I was done with the Captain America book, I'm like, God, I love Cap. He's just such a great character from one end to the other, just from his creation all the way through to the Brubaker run and the current stuff they're doing under Nick Spencer. Just
Hmm.
such an amazing character that they've done so many wonderful and fun and exciting and even topical things with. Um, and he really speaks to me in a lot of different ways that I didn't realize until I had sat down and actually examined him from one end to the other like that. And I just had an amazing time working in that book. And I had a couple of guys help me out with that one too. But I wrote about 80% of it myself and outlined the entire book ahead of time. Um, and basically was the developer on the book as well, the guy who says this is what's all going to happen, and this is where the artwork's coming from. And there's nothing like it to go back through 75 years of Marvel artwork and say I'd like this piece and this piece and this piece. It's like a kid in a candy store. Just
Absolutely.
amazing, beautiful stuff they have.
Now, out of the Avengers, besides Captain America, who's your favorite Avenger?
I'm going to cheat and say Spider-Man because he's an Avenger nowadays in the comics, right? Or was for a long
Right.
time. And I think, and another cheat I could use is Wolverine, who's often not an Avenger, but was for a long time. I think Wolverine's just got one of the most interesting backstories, and has got that rough and tumble, trying to control himself feeling about him. I just love that. For the classic Avengers, that's a good question. I think Iron Man actually is probably my favorite classic Avenger, other than Captain America. And that's one of the reasons in Civil War, the original Civil War, and even in the
Hmm.
Secret War that we had just a couple years ago, um, he and Cap are the two opposite ends of each other, right? They're the dichotomy that they like to play with because you got one guy who's like, "This is it, right or wrong. We need to stand on our principles. We need to make sure we're doing the right thing. Obviously this is what we need to do." And that's Cap, right? And then on the other side you have Tony Stark, who's like, we need to make compromises. We need to be clever about this. We need to be pragmatic about this. It's not how we're doing it. It's the end result that matters more than anything else, right? So for Tony, it's always the end result that matters. For Cap, it's how you get there that matters, right? And
Hmm.
to have that that tension between the two of them, I think is one of the reasons that the Avengers work so well, both in the comics and in the films, actually, and in the Civil War film. That tension between their two fairly uh, stark viewpoints, to use it, the Tony Stark viewpoints, I guess, but fairly different viewpoints um, that are both understandable and both have good legs to stand on as far as making their arguments, right? Um, Especially when you look in terms of even modern day, you're like, is it more important that we defeat terrorism, or is it more important that we stay true to our values as we fight against terrorism, right? And
Right, which is happening now in current politics
exactly,
too.
right. And I think that's a valuable and and reasonable argument to have. I know where I stand on it, but I understand the other side as well. And I think that we need to be able to understand both sides to be able to have those kind of dialogues that we can actually produce something meaningful out of it at both the policy level, politically, nationally, whatever, and in fiction, right? And I think it's an
Hmm.
uh, intriguing landscape to work on with fiction because of that, because it is so vital to us nowadays, actually, in our national dialogue.
Your most recent book that's come out is set in is in the Dungeons and Dragons universe or fandom,
Yeah,
and it's called Dungeonology. And for those of you that have not seen the cover, um, it's got a pretty wicked mind flare
yeah.
on it, which is awesome. And you said before we started recording that seeing it in person is even better than just seeing it on the computer screen.
Yeah, the graphic that's all over the internet that you see on any kind of like you go to Amazon or whatever, is kind of got this flat logo on it. It's all very flat because that's the way it is, right? Because things like this don't photograph very well. But um, Dungeonology actually has got this beautiful foil ink all the way through it. The logo comes across as this embossed silver. The entire cover has got this embossed maze on it as well, and the Mind Flayer himself is embossed onto the cover. So it looks like he's actually sticking up from the cover. It's really a fantastic piece. The guys over at Templar who published this, or Studio Press, I guess is the imprint that's doing it, just did a fantastic job with it art-wise, all the way from one end to the other. There are all sorts of little bits in it. This is one of the ology books, which maybe a lot of your listeners might be familiar with, but if they've got kids who are middle grade age, they probably know about, right? These are like Dungeonology is the one I'm doing, but Dragonology, Spyology, Egyptology. These are books that explore these different topics and have like pop-ups that come out of them and little letters that pull out and actual booklets pasted into them and other neat paper tchotchkes or paper origami adventures that they have in them, kind of.
Okay.
And so they did a whole series of these. They did 12 of these up until now at Candlewick Press and at Templar over in the UK. Candlewick is the US publisher. Um, and then they decided they wanted to do a little bit more. So they actually licensed the Dungeons and Dragons universe from Wizards of the Coast, or from Hasbro, which owns Wizards of the Coast as well. So they decided to do Dungeonology. And this one's set in the Forgotten Realms, which is the most popular of the Dungeons and Dragons settings that they have, and the one that they've been pushing fairly hard since third edition.
Right.
Even second edition, really. And it's an update to it brings everything up to date to fifth edition. And it's written by a guy, or it's written by me, but it's narrated by a guy named Volo, who did Volo's Guide to the Realms and Volo's Guide to Baldur's Deep and Volo's Guide to blah, 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 all the way through many years ago. Most of these were written by a guy named Ed Greenwood, who was the creator of the Forgotten Realms. Ed actually created the Forgotten Realms back when he was, I think, like 6 or 8 years old. And
Wow.
is now, and then he sold it to or to TSR before that, and then to Wizards of the Coast, back when he was in his 20s, I think. And now is actually coming up on its 50th anniversary. I think Ed's having a 50th birthday party at a convention I'm going to be at this weekend called Gamehole Con in Madison, Wisconsin. And Ed's going to be there as well, celebrating this amongst many other things. But so it's been going for 50 years, and it's a fantastic, wonderful universe with a lot of depth to it. I wrote it in the voice of Volo, one of Ed's creations. And then Ed actually was kind enough to write the foreword to the book in the voice of his most famous creation, Elminster the Wizard, who writes a letter that is it's pasted onto the inside front cover in a little pocket envelope, and it says, for Dungeoneers only or Dungeonologists only. And it says, whatever you do, don't listen to this guy. He's an idiot. He's a fool. You're only encouraging him, right? Because Ed's a very funny guy. He did a great job with it. But it's a great book. It's I think it's about 30 pages, or maybe about 30 pages all the way through. These heavy cardstock that has all these different tchotchkes on it. And then there's another 16-page book in the back, actually, as well. That's Volo's Guide to the Realms. That takes you through the Forgotten Realms and beyond. But the main book is really about how you put together your adventuring party, what kind of characters you need, what kind of classes they need to be, what are the different races like in this world, elves, dwarves, etc. What kind of weapon you're going to need, what kind of spells you might need, what kind of monsters you might face. And basically is a primer for an adventurer about to start off on his first dungeon, right?
Okay.
And then the back book is a little bit more about the realms and the various places you might go to. It's got all sorts of neat things. It's got a lenticular card where there's a dragon's face appears in a dungeon gate, just lots and lots of neat things. It's really intended for like readers 8 to 12 or 8 to 14, or even adults who are kind of, D&D curious, I like to say, right? if you're intrigued by this whole idea and what it might involve, this is a really neat primer for kids or for people who haven't played D&D before. It's not really for the D&D gamer, although if you've been playing D&D, it'll be fun. You'll recognize a lot of the things in it. You'll maybe see some secrets in there you didn't know about before. They'll update you to 5th edition. But it's really about getting kids intrigued and excited about fantasy role-playing games. And I think it's done a good job of that. I had just a ball working on it. And the guys over at Templar or Studio Press were fantastic fun. They were obviously fans as well. They have an in-house, in-studio game that they play every week. And they go to conventions as well. So like, they were just as excited as I was.
Right. Now, the next book that you have coming out is the Star Wars Rogue One Junior Novelization.
Yes, that was a kick and a half. I'm really excited about that.
Now, because it hasn't come out yet as we're recording this, there are certain things that we can and cannot talk about. Exactly. So
yeah, I'm not allowed to talk about anything that hasn't been publicly revealed as far as plot, characters, etc. so far.
Right. Now, before we get started on Rogue One, were you a Star Wars fan to begin with?
Oh, of course. Isn't everybody? I mean, I'm sure there are some
my wife has not watched any of them. And I still to this, like, we've been married almost 10 years, and there are times where I'm like, how have I not made her watch this? And then how did she not watch this before I married her?
Yeah, it's stunning. I mean, the way I grew up, you couldn't escape it, right? It was I, Star Wars was. I remember seeing it. I think it came out in '78, so I'd have been 9 years old when it first came out, right? And it just blew my mind. I mean, it was the first movie I ever saw multiple times in the theater. This is back before we had DVDs or DVRs or whatever, any of
Right.
this kind of stuff. So if you wanted to see a movie, you had to see it again in the theater. That was the only way to do it. I saw it 7 times in the theater as a kid. My dad took me to see it over and over and over again, and me and my brother and my sisters, and we just adored it. And when Empire came out and Jedi came out, we were right there first day. Just had to see it. It's been that way for every one of the movies. Um,
Right.
but and it's funny. I work in the video game industry as well. I do a lot of writing in the video game industry, and we work with people across the entire world. I've gone to Shanghai, I've gone to Singapore, I've gone to Stockholm, all sorts of different places. And the one cultural touchstone I can always depend on game developers knowing is Star Wars. Right? If they say I don't understand how this works, and I say, well, you remember in Star Wars how they did this, and they all get it
Right.
then, right? Um, so it's yeah, you got to get your wife up to speed at some point. Hopefully, she'll enjoy it. I mean, I think the movies have actually aged pretty well, especially the first three. But
Absolutely.
and I actually enjoyed the Force Awakens quite a lot. And I'm really looking forward to seeing Rogue One, of course, because I've read the script and have seen some of the footage, and I'm very impressed with everything I've seen so far. It's going to be amazing.
Right. That was one of the things I talked with another of my podcast guests with. Um, you know, I was born later than the original three. It was out on videotape when I was around,
Sure.
but I was there for the re-releases back into the theaters, and then the prequels. And I enjoyed the prequels. There were times where I was like, oh, I really disliked parts of
Yeah.
them. Um, Loved the Clone Wars cartoon show. Enjoy Rebels. When Lucas sold to Disney, I was like, well, at least with what Disney's been doing as far as like the Marvel stuff, they've handled it really well. I'm sure they'll knock it out of the park. And for the longest time, like I wasn't really interested in Force Awakens because of how they they took the expanded universe and kind of shifted it to make their own start of like the new canon for novels and
Right.
whatnot.
Yeah.
And I'd grown up on the expanded universe, so I was kind of entered into Force Awakens just hesitantly. But Rogue One, when I saw the teaser for it and I saw the trailer for it, that was the movie that I was most invested in between Force Awakens and Rogue One.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think part of it's because it's welded into that first movie in a lot of ways. I mean, it's the story of the people who find the plans for the first Death Star, so that it can be destroyed in the first film, right?
Right.
And I think because of it touches upon that kid in us who saw that first film, and it's very respectful of all that. I mean, it fits into it, melds into it perfectly. It's a wonderful, wonderful script, and you'll all see in December 16th. I haven't seen it myself yet. I've seen bits of it. And I can't wait to see it myself. Even my kids and my wife are begging me for details, and now I can't tell anybody. Right?
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think people forget about the extended universe that, when Disney came and said, we're going to kill all this stuff off so we can have free hand with the new movies, Lucas did the exact same thing when he came out with the prequels, right?
Right.
He threw out all the other novels and whatever else had been written at that point and said, look, I need a clean slate here so I can do this. And I think that's understandable. I think otherwise you end up having the tail wag the dog, really. The film and the films in these cases are the dog. And if you could have a comic book written 30 years ago or a novel written 5 years ago or whatever, dictating that you cannot touch this subject because it's already been done,
Hmm.
as opposed to being able to do a great version of it in the film, then I think it's perfectly legitimate to say I need to toss this film or toss these things out so I have space for the film to breathe, right? Now
Right.
that said, the Lucasfilm Story Group, which is a fantastic uh, group of people they have inside of Lucasfilm these days, who I worked with on the novelization and such, they're amazing. These guys know Star Wars history better than anybody else in the world, right? They're the guys who actually are writing the encyclopedias down, writing all the books, and writing all the visual guides and such for Star Wars. And they have a really good sense of history and who the characters are and what the universe is about and why people care about it and why everybody from watchers to comic book readers to novel readers, whoever else, game players, why they care about these things. So I think we're in really good hands as far as that goes. Um, and I think you see that in the fact that one of the first novels they announced this last year that's coming out early next year includes Admiral Thrawn, who was one of the characters
Right.
from the original stories that Timothy Zahn did, and some of the
Yes.
first Star Wars novels that came out in the expanded universe back before the prequels, even, right?
Right.
And for them to be able to say, it's not that we're tossing everything out, guys. It's just that we're tossing out the stuff that we're giving the filmmakers a clean slate to work with. But where we
Mm-hmm.
can find places that with the stuff from the expanded universe that we all knew and loved that's going to fit, we're going to bring them back. We're going to have them fit in there. I think it's amazing to be able to pull that off, and they are really respectful of that stuff to the extent that they can be, and to the extent that it's appropriate.
Right. Absolutely. Now, who was your favorite Star Wars character?
Han Solo. Well, part of that's because I think because of Harrison Ford, right? I think Harrison Ford
Mm-hmm.
was my favorite actor of that whole era too. I loved him in Indiana Jones. I loved him in Blade Runner. I loved him in everything else I saw. I even loved him in Apocalypse Now. He's actually got like 2 lines in Apocalypse Now, right? Which I think was one of his first films. Um, I just thought he was an amazing actor. He was one of my heroes growing up as a kid, and he played a lot of my heroes growing up as a kid. So Han Solo, I just love the idea of this rogue with a heart of gold, the guy who is hard nosed and can do the things he needs to, and is about saving his own skin, but really at the end comes through for his friends, right?
Right.
And that spoke to me on a lot of different levels, and I just loved him as a character. Some of the other characters, I mean, I think Princess Leia is fantastic. I think that Luke, as much as I like him, it can come across as a bit whiny, especially as
Right.
you're like, come on, get it together, kid. Although Luke is obviously the hero of the whole hero's journey that Lucas was tapping into, the whole Joseph Campbell hero's journey that
Mm-hmm.
he was, intentionally tapping into when he wrote this stuff, when he created this stuff. Luke is clearly your farm boy with the call to action and everything else. But I actually think a lot of the other characters are more interesting, more fun to play with. And man, I'm really looking forward to the new Han Solo movie that they've announced that's going to be coming out. Well, I don't even know when it's coming out. I guess a couple of years from now. But
I know that they announced Donald Glover being the
yeah,
young Lando Calrissian, which is awesome.
it's fantastic. And Glover is so amazing. I've loved him in everything I've seen. I don't know if you're watching Atlanta right now, which is a new show on FX that he's in charge of. But I first became aware of him when he was on Community when he played Troy.
Right.
And apparently he was a writer for 30 Rock before that, just a writer. So he's got that kind of sensibility too. And now that he's in charge of the show called Atlanta, which he's writing and starring, it's amazingly funny. It is so good. Originally he called it like he wanted to make a Black Twin Peaks, but as a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And man, that just hit me on so many different levels, and it's so good. I think the last episode's coming out this week for the first season, and they've already been renewed for a second season. It's such a good show.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. I've heard good things about it,
If you haven't had a
but
chance, they're only a half hour each, right?
okay.
And I think there are only 10 episodes in the first season. But it'll hook you pretty quick. It's just, he's clearly got some geek credit too. But there's also a lot of hip hop and stuff going on as well, and black culture in Atlanta, and just funny, human, amazing, quirky stuff.
Now, how did the Rogue One uh, junior novelization happen? I've talked with Kevin Hearn, who did Heir to the Jedi,
Yeah,
the third book that was released under the new canon series.
right.
Did they approach you and say we would like you to do this particular novel?
Yeah, they did actually out of the blue. Right. Jen Heddle is the editor I'm working with over at Lucasfilm's book group, Lucasfilm/Disney book group, and she's amazing and fantastic to work with. And I've been following her on Twitter for years. I knew she was working with Star Wars. I knew she was working with some friends of mine. I don't know Kevin personally, but we have a lot of mutual friends. Like Chuck Wendig and I go way back.
Mm-hmm.
And Chuck's writing a trilogy of Star Wars novels and the comic book adaptation of The Force Awakens at the moment. And I was like, I'd love to write Star Wars at any point, guys. And Troy Denning's a buddy of mine. He's been writing Star Wars novels. Aaron Alston, rest his soul, was a good friend of mine as well from the gaming industry, and he wrote a bunch of Star Wars novels. And Mike Stackpole, etc. And still, I mean, a couple times I'd met some editors, and I kind of made some inroads there. Nothing ever seemed to come of it. And then out of the blue, I get this email from Jen, and she says, "Would you be interested in writing the novelization for this?" I'm like, I yelled, "Holy shit!" so loud. My wife upstairs. This is just me reading the email. My wife upstairs thought somebody had died. She thought there was some kind of disaster going on because I was just so shocked by this. And I asked Jen about it later. She's like, she had worked with Ed Schlesinger, the guy I wrote the Guild Wars novel for way back in the day over at Pocket Books before she moved over to Disney and Lucasfilm. And so she knew I had a good reputation through him. And she knew I had written some YA stuff and she knew I had written some military stuff. And since this was going to be a book of the junior novelization, and because it's a fairly militaristic plot line, it's
Mm-hmm.
about these characters that are, I don't want to give away too much, but obviously it's a war story.
Right.
If anybody's seen the trailers, you can tell that fit me really well, right? And there aren't too many people that actually write YA and military stuff at the same time, and do fantasy and science fiction as well. So I guess my number came up, and she just looked and said, "Oh, that would be perfect. Let's see if Madeline's interested in doing that." I'm like, "Oh God, yes." And like in about 2 weeks' notice, I think maybe less, I ended up flying out to Lucasfilm, and we did a summit with a bunch of writers. There was like Greg Rucka and Beth Rivas, who's had her book announced, and Jason Fry, who was writing some stuff for her as well, and Alex Freed, who's writing the adult novelization, and Gary Whitta, who wrote the first draft of the film. They were all there, including a bunch of Marvel guys as well. Dwayne Straczynski, Noel Stevenson, I think, was going to be doing some stuff. Amazing, right? Um, and just good, fun people to talk to, and to be able to sit down there and get to read through the script and to be able to think about what we could do with this, right? And the other guys, a lot of them, like Greg and Beth, were off going to be doing spin-off novels. I just was doing the novelization, but
Right.
In some ways that's less exciting because you're not coming up with new things of your own. But in other ways, it's more exciting because you get to work on that core property, right? And
Mm-hmm.
be associated with that film and to be able to see and breathe life into those characters before they even hit the screen. And that's just an amazing challenge and an amazing honor. It's a lot of fun.
What's the difference between doing, like, say, the novelization compared to the junior novelization? Is it just language that you're using, or like what's the differences, or the
Yeah.
for you as a writer?
The big difference is length, believe it or not, right? So when I write YA stuff or middle grade stuff, even, I do my best not to dumb down the language. And when I write stuff for adults, I do my best to be as clear and concise as I can, as opposed to flexing my vocabulary. Um, and because of that, when I'm adjusting to writing for younger audiences, it's not that much of a leap to me. It's more about writing in clear, complete sentences as opposed to doing something that might having syntax that might be bit more convoluted, right? Uh,
Right.
and then the length is a big thing. So a junior novel is only about 40,000 words, whereas a full-on novelization is between 80 to 100,000 words, right? Um, so it's actually a bit more of a challenge for me in that I have to make sure I could fit everything in the film into the book, right? Um, whereas when you're writing a full-on novelization of 100,000 words, you have a lot more room to breathe, and you're actually creating a lot more things and interpreting a lot more things in the heads of the characters, and maybe adding a lot more backstory that you're creating out of whole cloth to try to fit into this thing. So Alex has a much bigger challenge in that sense, as far as filling out the pages that he has to fill out. Whereas I was trying to make sure I just got all the cool stuff in there that I possibly could.
Okay.
And it turned out it wasn't actually all that challenging. 120, 130 page screenplay is about 40,000 words when you build it out into a novelization. So without actually doing too many digressions or going too far with it. So it actually worked out pretty well. I was pretty stunned by that. Although I was very conscious of my word count the entire way through. I'm like, okay, I got this many pages to go. I've written this much. Is it all going to work out in the end?
Right.
Because I don't want to go too far over. I don't want to go too far under. But I think I hit it just about right. I think it came in at about 42,000 words.
Now, I know with some novelizations that I've read, there are times where there are things added that aren't in the movie,
Yeah.
or there are things changed or endings changed. Is that the case where you got to add like little bits or pieces to the universe when you're writing, or because you're working on the junior novelization where it's a little bit shorter, you don't have that much room to just add or change little bits around.
Yeah, I didn't have too much room, and mostly again that's because of the length, and Alex will have a lot more flexibility with that. But I did add a
Hmm.
number of things. All of it got approved by Lucasfilm, obviously, and the Lucasfilm Story Group, and Jen Haddle, who's the editor on the book. And it's intriguing because what you're trying to do is extrapolate from what they have there in front of you, right? And interpret who the characters are. And in a lot of cases, these are new characters that nobody's ever seen before and haven't
Right.
seen until the film comes out, other than in a trailer. So uh, you need to be careful about not stepping on other toes, but you still have a lot of free reign in it because it's not like I'm trying to write Princess Leia or Han Solo or characters that people have seen dozens of times before, right? So I have a little bit more leeway with that. And it's interesting because you actually, in some cases, look at the actors and look at the stuff they've done before and try to interpret it through them, try to figure out how they're going to interpret those characters, right?
Right.
And get a little bit more depth that way. Um, I didn't do too much adding a backstory. There were bits where I'm like, okay, this flows through here. I'd seen three different versions of the screenplay, so I bits like this no longer fit in the screenplay, obviously, but there are elements of that I can take and rework back into the character, right? Or maybe back
Hmm.
into some details about the character that are not going to show up in the film because they're not in the script anymore, but were in an earlier draft of it and a perfectly fair game to put into the novelization.
Now, I don't know if this is a question that you can give me an answer on, but did you have a favorite character that you got to write that's in the book?
I think Jen Urso is the main character, is just intriguing all to hell from one end to the other. She's got a great backstory. She's got and her change from who she is at the beginning of the film to who she becomes at the end of the film is really what the film's about in a lot of ways. Uh,
Right.
and I'm saying this and I'm being oblique on purpose, but I think that she's really one of my favorite characters. The dynamic between uh, uh, now I'm struggling to remember the names of the characters. Baze and Churret, who are two guys that you see in the trailers again, played by Donnie Yen, and
Hmm.
the other Asian actor's name is escaping me at the moment. But they have just got this great dynamic going on with them. Another character who was a lot of fun to work with was K2SO, who's the android, who's
That's Alan
yeah,
Tudyk.
played and voiced by Alan Tudyk. And Alan's got a great sense of humor, and that comes across very well in the novelization as well and in the script. And the interesting thing is, he actually was one of the characters that I write about in my Halo novel. He played one of the characters in the Halo novel, and he's good buddies with Nathan Fillion, but they both did voices for Halo 3 ODST, and my
Hmm.
Halo novel is actually a sequel to that video game, right? So it's fun to be able to kind of play with Alan's voice in one setting and then to take it over to another setting as well.
Do you think people will enjoy Rogue One when after they see it?
I sure hope so. I think it's going to be an amazing film, right? And I know that this is the kind of film that I am going to love. I can't speak for everybody out there. It's certainly not going
Hmm.
to be the kind of film that The Force Awakens was. That was basically an homage to the original Star Wars film in many many levels, right?
Right,
So
right.
this is something new and something fresh. It still has a lot of the same bits that we're all going to know and love from Star Wars, but this is in an era where there aren't any Jedi, right? There's no people running around with lightsabers and doing duels, and that's going to be the first time we're going to have a Star Wars film like that, right? Um, and it's more of a war film, which again, that hits me pretty well in my heart in the areas that I like to think about stories. But I don't know if it'll speak to everyone. On the other hand, it's a great story, like I said about Jen. Uh, I think her journey along the film is kind of a universal one in discovering who she is and what she cares about. And I think that's going to speak to a lot of people very strongly. I know there's some people out there complaining about having a strong female character, but she really is amazing. I think that for people like my wife, my daughter, and other female fans, other women fans, girls, women, whatever, they're going to love this. They're going to really be awed by it in a lot of ways.
Okay. And definitely it's one of those first it's the first for a Star Wars film to be not, one, two, three, four, five, six, or seven. The first standalone ever.
Exactly, and that I think is the real risk for them here, and then they know this stuff. I mean, I don't think it's much of a risk in the fact they got a great director, they got great writers, they got great actors, they have a universe everybody loves. But to take it away from that main storyline and do a separate story off that's a bit of a risk. I mean, it's not going to be a slam dunk. Like, I mean, Episode 8 how many people line up for blocks ahead of time, for days ahead of time to go see episode 8, right? They've already got that audience lined up. And this is something new and different. It's a big experiment for them to try something like this. And I applaud them for being brave enough to do this and not just stick with those 9 films they want to do, or 7, 8, and 9, and finish that off and then say, now what? We don't know. And to do this, I think they're being very canny to do it in the middle of the other films, right? To not just release 7, 8, and 9 1 year apart, but to do other films, these anthology films, as they call them, to do this one and then to do the young Han Solo film, because it reminds people that they love this stuff, and that even if this film here might not be exactly what they're looking for, another one that is exactly what they're looking for is coming next year, right?
Right.
And honestly, I think it's going to be a huge hit. I think it's going to shock a lot of people in how much they like it without it being exactly what they were thinking it was going to be.
Now, after Rogue One releases, what's next for you?
That's a good question. Things I can't talk about at the moment. Nothing else has been announced after that. So I've got, I have 5 more novels under contract at the moment, and another couple books I just started talking to somebody about last week that are probably going to come through. If cross your fingers. It looks very likely. So plenty of other new things. Obviously, the Shotguns and Sorcery role-playing game coming out next year, and I'm very excited about that. But the other stuff that I've actually got signed on, I've got a novel for an Exalted role-playing game that I'm way late on. I've got which is based upon the role-playing game from White Wolf back in the day. That's going to be coming up. I have a novel for my Monster Academy series. I'm going to finish off the last novel on that, which is a YA series or middle grade series for kids. It's set in a fantasy universe where the monsters have all been beaten, all the bad guys are gone, except that the young monsters are still alive, and the heroes have to figure out what to do with them. Do you kill the young monsters? They haven't done anything wrong yet. So they put them in basically a juvenile academy for monsters called Monster Academy. So, and I've got 1 book out for that. The second book is in the can, and I'm finishing up the 3rd book right now. And I have a novel I sold to Tor that I haven't written yet, and a couple other licensed tie-in novels I can't talk about yet.
Okay. If people are listening and they want to check out your work or do social media or websites, what's the best place for them to go to?
Go to forbeck.com, Forbeck.com. That's my website. And it's got links up there to everything else. You can find me on Twitter at mforbeck, and I'm on Facebook under the name Forbeck as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to record with me today. I greatly appreciated it.
It was my pleasure, David. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.